Okay, this is Chris Goldthorpe with ChessChessChess.com, and this video is going to be about the Four Knights game. It will be on a very basic level, so this is appropriate for your beginning students. This is usually an opening that beginners start with just because they're developing their pieces toward the center and learning where their knights go. So this whole video will be on a much more basic level than any of the other opening videos here. These are good moves for all the normal reasons that I'm sure all new students have been told over and over about controlling the center and letting the bishop out and so on. This is an active move, creates a threat on an unguarded piece. Almost all scholastic chess games start with this position. They could almost just set their pieces up like this. I'm sure it's more than 90% of the games. In this position in scholastic chess, the breakdown of next moves is very different than it is in general among master play. In master play, this is the most common move. So beginners always think, oh, I should play that. Well, the players who play that are facing grandmaster opponents who are the black pieces, who are very, very familiar with all the sharp, intricate lines of these sharp openings from the Italian game and gambits and things like that. So that's why a very strong player might prefer to play the Ruy Lopez or even d4 or something more positional against a grandmaster opponent. In scholastic chess, you're generally going to have good results with something like the Scotch game or the Gioco Piano. We'll call this the Italian game because if black plays knight f6 now, we have the two knights defense, where this is a good move, targeting f7. But since this video is going to be about the Four Knights game, I'm not going to go into any more detail than that. I just want to show you what some of the main alternatives are. If a player is serious about getting good and they intend to stay in chess, at some point I am going to suggest to them that they move on from the Four Knights game. It's pretty easy for beginners as black to get a good game out of the opening, so it's not too scary for black. Black can here play a strange move. He could do this. That's kind of a different move. But there's also some other different moves that we could encounter along the way here. For instance, if you're trying to play the Four Knights as white, if he plays the Petrov, or so-called Russian defense, white could take this pawn. He could play d4. He can play bishop to c4. Play here, black has really nothing much better than transpose into the Four Knights game. And just as we could transpose into the Italian Four Knights when black plays defense, which is not a position I would recommend for white to get into, because black can play the four in a minute. I just want you to know that the transposition is there. Kids are caught unaware of that sometimes. So let's say he goes knight c3, and black continues with the main line. In almost every game where white plays knight c3, we're going to see black play knight f6 here. So I had mentioned the Italian Four Knights, which is this move. I don't recommend it. I'll show you a brief game here where black plays the fork trick. Now, we're going to see what happens if white takes back, but you can see by these arrows, black will win his piece back with a pawn fork. It's guarded by the queen. This is worse for white than playing knight to knight. He does that because if he has two pieces here, black will have the fork. So white reasons, well, I might as well dislodge his king. but he's giving up a bishop instead of a knight, and in the process allows black to have a magnificent, powerful center. If white doesn't take the knight back, he stays a piece down. Check, and the king goes back here. Black is already threatening to win a piece. The red arrow gives it away. The black queen here on d8 is attacking this white knight on g5, and this is the only piece guarding it. So if black threatens that knight, then white's going to have to lose a piece for a pawn one way or another. So the game I'm talking about continued this way, and then black came out and pinned this knight. White castled, and black attacked this knight, ultimately to be able to get his rook out. The knight doesn't really have any good place to go except h3, but here white made an unforced error, allowing black to just save his bishop, and now of course white is losing a piece here. But this is the worst of those three options. The other two options are for white to castle here or to take the knight. So castles is likely best, but I'm sure you want to see what happens when the knight takes. Obviously black needs to get his piece back, so he does this. But there's a few moves here that need to be considered. One of them is to just take the pawn. White reasons, well, I'm going to lose a piece anyway, so I might as well get a pawn. I'm not sure this is white's best way to play. Black takes back. Black has the bishop pair and an attack on this knight and the only pawn in the center. So this is about a half a pawn better for black. However, in a game between two kids in scholastic chess, I wouldn't really consider black to be a heavy favorite. Alex Dunn, the correspondence chess champion, once said that usually players need to be over and above Class A to really take full benefit of having a bishop pair. So it's a small advantage. But let's go back here and see if we have a better move. Bishop to d5, the obvious idea is that we're pinning the knight so that when black, white will go here. Of course, if this were white to move, white would have a very strong move. Let's say black did some move. If black were to take here, then this would happen. So the move for black is attacking both the knight and the bishop are unguarded, and this is unguarded. If he attack, not a problem. I just take right back. Or there might be something better here. Well, he's got to get out of check. Yeah. And now the knight and the g-pawn are under attack. And of course, this doesn't work. Black will develop. So this queen g5 move is very strong after white takes the knight here. So black can just take the knight, and he's not doing too badly from this bishop to b5. So white's best chance after the fork trick here, Italian variation, and let's say he does castles is white's best line. Okay, so at this point we should be able to see that d5 doesn't work. White has two attacking it and only the queen defending it. So the best that black can do is to go ahead and trade. White actually does better here to take away from the center because he releases his bishop and his queen. He's ready to move his rook to e1, And although this is supposedly about equal, according to the computer, in real games, white does okay with this. But every player is going to have to abandon the Italian four knights at some point if they continue to improve and encounter stronger opposition. So let's get to the four knights game proper, where bishop to b5 is the recommended move. So I'm going to briefly look at d4. d4 is related to the Scotch game. In the Scotch game, we have this move, this immediate d4. Okay, black should take. White can now play the Scotch gambit, but we're not going to get into the Scotch or the Scotch gambit or the Goring gambit here. We're only interested in the way that the Scotch game can transpose into four knights. Transpose means you get to the same position with an unusual move order. If black gets his knight out and white does, then we have this transposition. So let's go back to here and look at the d4 first, since I do not consider this to be the main line. Okay, black does need to take this. Now, white does have an interesting variation called the Belgrade Gambit. Here, and he'll delay recapturing this pawn. He should have little difficulty recovering that pawn. Black probably should play bishop to e7, although bishop c5 first is a very difficult line to play. White is not too interested in trading his knight for this bishop, and this could be kind of interesting. This is probably worth a video all on its own. Just a few more moves. Bishop here is quite a threat, eh? d6 ends that and releases the other bishop. We might take this pawn, so white did end up getting his pawn back. Some say he's a little overextended. I don't mind this position for black. Again, it's very easy for black to equalize in almost all of these lines. If you're the black pieces and you're playing against a weaker player, instead of this main line, bishop to b4, you may want to try a very sharp line here, this knight to d4 variation. Very sharp, kind of complicated. I would not recommend for white to attempt to take this pawn at e5. Not a good idea. For starters, is going to find this move, because now the knight, and you can this. But white has even better on knight e5, and go here, lining up with the white king, and white has to be very careful here. And there's the overprotection, the overworked piece that couldn't go between both of these. It's threatening a fork now because the queen's no longer guarding c7. d6, now it is, and it attacks the knight. That was the whole intent of queen e7. Otherwise, it would be blocking this bishop forever. Comes back, and he takes with check. White goes here so that he threatens to pin the queen with his rook, but then we'll check him, and if he doesn't want to get in the way of his rook, he'd have to still come up. I would prefer not to do this as white. So, knight d4. The move I would recommend for white here is actually bishop a4 if you're playing the white pieces here. It's a move you may encounter even if black doesn't know this as a strong opening. A beginner may pick up a knight and move it for the second time without realizing its meaning, though it actually is a decent move. Black can play bishop c5 here, because on knight takes c5, black will just castle. Obviously, the queen can't go to any of these squares because of the knight. Let's say white makes a very normal looking move, like he just moves his knight back here. Well, develop again. White doesn't get too much out of it because he spent so many turns to get it. Black has good development. He's actually threatening to... no, he's not threatening that just yet. But yeah, a6 or c6 leaves b5 an annoying threat. If black goes here, he'll be threatening to play b5 and trap the bishop. And black has a lot of places to put his pieces. So this is kind of difficult for him. So let's look at the main line then, where black does not play knight to d4, where he plays bishop to b4, which I regard to be a stronger move for black. It gets a new piece out. The knight d4 is good for black if they're trying to get white to make some tactical mistakes. It's a little sharper. They both castle. d3, d6, bishop g5. This is where black had better not copy white's move. I mean, if he goes here, this is difficult to deal with. It's actually better than the knight to d5 move, especially in practice. Black pretty much has to take with his g-pawn. If he takes with the queen, white has a very nasty move. Very powerful move. He just goes here with his knight. If black thinks, well, I'll attack his queen too, he forgot that this comes with... and then white will take the bishop next. So black cannot copy that move that white just made. When white goes here, black cannot copy. So he needs to prevent this knight on c3 from ever getting to d5. So this is where he should trade. This is a concession. Something where you give away something in order to preserve something else. You would rather not give it away, but you have to. White, therefore, should not be trading a bishop for a knight. Black only did that because he needs to prevent this knight to d5. This is sort of a result of the fact that white got to move first. Now, what black would like to do is to get this knight to this square to attack the bishop to break the pin. So he begins something called the Mettger unpin. Moves his queen. It still guards the knight. White starts to develop. And now the knight begins its journey, going to the square the queen was just on. And white starts putting pressure on the center. Black still has two defenders. And then he goes here. Well, that looks like it cuts the queen off from guarding e5. Problem is, if I take and then he takes, what will black do if white takes the pawn? Let's take a look. Take. Takes. And now you can see that knight takes e5 is nowhere on this list of good moves. And what do you think black should do here? Of course, he takes the free piece and he attacks more pieces. So this is unplayable for white. This knight takes e5 here. I mean, the best he can do is this. Okay, so this is a good start in the 4 knights. White brings his bishop back here. I know that looks strange, but white will often put his bishop onto g2 next. So black is naturally going to try to put the kibosh on the center. He's going to try to close the center off because white has bishops. Black wants a closed position. White wants an open position because white has the bishop pair. He's going to stick his bishop into g2. This queen actually helps to guard e5 from that, because if the pawn takes, he takes back. And the rook will be attacking the white queen, while the queen will be guarding this pawn from the knight. So white closes the center, but that's what black wanted. Black has his king side defended well enough. White clears the diagonal for his queen, but for now he can't go to either of g4 or h5. Knight g6. He gets a piece off the back row out of the way of the rooks. Black trades a few pieces off. The queen guards the knight so that white cannot rip open the king side. At this point, white doesn't really have enough pieces to do any damage, even if he did. He keeps the e-pawn guarded by the bishop. And now black is going to take up some space on the queen side. He made a place for his bishop to maybe come out. White kind of forces him to move it forward so that he can trade off his doubled pawn. This position is a little better for white, as almost all openings are. However, it's pretty easy for black to get equality. It's also not reasonable to think that white's going to make all of these moves perfectly, or for that matter, that black is. And since the 4 knights game is typically an opening that we only see among absolute beginners, a good objective from this for your student is just to get through the opening without losing any pieces and getting all their knights and bishops off the back row. So let's have another look at the main line here. And if you're a new player, I don't think it is worth it for you to spend the time to memorize all of these moves. I mean, the key thing is that after this position, this is good for white. If you're the white pieces, good to know that. If you're the black pieces, I would recommend for you to play here. Castling, and then d3, d6. These are all good moves for both sides. Okay. Now, as black, it's important to realize you can't copy here. You really are sort of forced to make this trade. And from there, for black, just remember to try to get your knight to this square by moving your queen here. As white, don't be anxious to trade your bishops for knights, and just try to keep control of the center. And you should have some fun learning how to play chess before you eventually promote yourself to a more sophisticated opening. Also, there are some very good YouTube videos besides this one, as soon as you get a little practice with it, that provide a little more detail, and I think that they're aimed at a more sophisticated, more experienced player. So